Break the silence. End the violence. You're watching Voices of Victory, a TV program designed to raise awareness on domestic violence. I'm your host, and my name is Danette Mahabeer Turner, a domestic violence survivor, advocate, and published author of the book Leave Alive, subtitled Goodbye Domestic Violence. And today I'm wearing the color purple. Purple is a symbol of peace, courage, survival, honor, and personal dedication to domestic violence awareness. Joining me on today's episode is none other than the owner and clinical psychologist of Delve Health Consulting. Help me to welcome Dr. Brooke Jacobs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, we're going to talk all things. I know we're going to focus on trauma bonding and just getting into the minds of not just the victim, but the abuser.
Yes.
And so before we get into that, I want to take the time out to, you telling us a little bit about your company and your current role at Delve Health Consulting.
Great. Thank you. Again, I'm just really excited to be here and excited you're doing this work. So a little bit about my history. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I started my work in the nonprofit world, and it happened to be in the domestic violence service provider. So I served as the staff psychologist at our local state designated domestic violence service provider. And through that time, I really started to see the impact that domestic violence was having in our community. I was a little bit naive to that before starting that position, and it really opened my eyes. And so through my professional journey, I saw the need for even wider community health through that role. And so I transitioned to starting the company Delve Health Consulting. So I work through employee wellness, community health, to really help people understand how their good intentions don't always play out in their implementation. And so coming from a clinical psychology perspective, really helping gear that. And one aspect of that still remains to be intimate partner violence, which we know happens in workplace settings. We know that mass violence incidents are usually tied to intimate partner violence. So with that lens of community health and making our community stronger and healthier, this still plays a large role in my work that I'm doing today.
And I just want to take the time out to say thank you for what you're doing as well in our community. And so we're going to start off with trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is often misunderstood. So can you explain what it is and how it affects a survivor's ability to leave an abusive relationship?
Absolutely. So trauma bonding really was kind of coined, that term, in the 90s, but we were researching it before that and calling it things like betrayal trauma and things like that. But it is this idea that really baffled people, that things could be going wrong and people could be harmed and experiencing trauma and not leave, right? And so we wanted to understand that pattern. And so we see that it is this cycle of fear that is kept in place by cyclical actions from the perpetrator that include abuse, but then are usually followed with lots of hope and promises and reconciliation. And that time for the survivor in that moment is really clinging to that idea of hope and that things can get better. And so it really creates this unique bond that is a way of survival. It is our brain's way of clinging to attachment in a moment of fear. And so when our brain gets scared, it shuts off that top part of our brain, our frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, and it goes into our downstairs brain where we are focused on survival. And one of our basic survival needs is attachment to others. And so here we are in a setting, in a romantic relationship, where the person who is supposed to love and honor and support us is also the person hurting us. This happens in parental abuse as well. And so we feel this really push-pull of, I'm scared and I want to go to my comfort zone, who happens to be the person hurting me. And so we feel like we're in a lose-lose situation, but because we're in the survival mode, that attachment is the one that is the hook, and it keeps us there to say, let me stay safe by attaching to the person who is supposed to be doing the things to support me and save me.
Right.
And then typically the perpetrator follows that up with those promises. I won't ever do it again. I'm so sorry. if you would have just X, Y, and Z, I wouldn't do this anymore. So then the victim feels blamed and they think that they can do something to reduce the abuse in the later steps of the relationship. And then we typically see that that does
So
not
that's a
happen.
pattern as well. You know, they go back to apologizing and doing something else and then apologizing.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
so it's like a bittersweet.
Yes, and it's a roller
Experience,
coaster
yes, absolutely.
for the victim. And we all have ups and downs in our relationships. And so the victim will maybe, or the survivor will go to their friends and say, gosh, we had this fight. And their friends may say, yeah, I had a fight with my spouse the other day too. And they are not on the same level, the same playing field. We talk about the same thing with codependency that can happen in unhealthy relationships that can start to mirror that. But that trauma bond is something more significant that really happens in these later stages of truly abusive situations, not just unhealthy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
And why do some survivors feel attached or loyal to their abuser even after experiencing harm? How does this bond complicate the decision to leave?
Absolutely. And so this speaks again to that need for attachment. We all have a basic human need for love and connection to others. We are social beings. We want to have this connection. And so we seek it, just like all of us. We want to most of us want to seek a romantic partner in our lives. And so when I communicate with survivors, most of the times I'll ask them, how did you fall in love with your partner? And they will tell me these wonderful love stories that I hear in healthy relationships. We met through a friend, we met through online, or we met through these different ways, and I fell in love with the person. And so then we have value systems that say we're not going to leave someone when they're down, or we're not going to leave someone when they do something wrong, because we don't want people to do that for us. And so we kind of tell ourselves, and usually the perpetrator kind of reiterates this idea that you're leaving me when I'm down, and so don't do that to me. And then there's threats of self-harm or suicide that amplify this. And so it's not just, you've hurt me and I shall leave now. That is not the exchange, and we often think that from the outside. It is complex. It is relationships. It is giving up the idea that they thought that they were going to have an entire future with this person. And so it's not just ending the relationship right then, it's giving up this whole idea of a life that was well thought out, that a future idea was going to be there of that relationship. And so there's so many layers of that. And they still love part of the person usually. And that's something that people from the outside also don't validate often enough, or see that they are also going to have to separate from the part of the person that they fell in love with. They never signed up for this. They didn't get a message online that said, hey, I'd like to meet you in 3 years, be your abuser and somebody who's isolating you. That's never what the victim got offered. They got offered this beautiful life and this wonderful relationship. And then it changed usually.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Very insightful. It is time for the safety tip of the day, brought to you by the Paducah Police Department, or very own Community Engagement Officer, Officer Blake Quinn.
Hey guys, it's Officer Quinn from the Paducah Police Department, and it's time for our safety tip of the day. Post-separation safety measures. After taking the brave step of distancing yourself from an abusive situation, it's critical to ensure ongoing safety. Here's what you should consider. Your protective order. Always keep the order of protection with you. Share photocopies with essential contacts like your children's school, employer, neighbors, and your local police. Home security. Change the locks on your doors to ensure your abuser cannot gain easy access. Child safety. Sit down with your children and walk them through a safety plan. Notify their school about authorized individuals for pickups and keep them informed. Community alert. Let your neighbors know about your situation. Provide them with a photo of the abuser and inform them of your order of protection. Ask them to call the police if they see anything suspicious. Workplace safety. At work, consider having someone screen your calls and escort you to your car. The more eyes watching out for you, the safer you'll feel. Minimal contact. If you must communicate with your ex-partner, opt for public places or involve a trusted third party to relay information. Seek support. Engage with organizations or individuals knowledgeable about domestic violence. Their guidance can be invaluable. Safety first and always, that's our motto. That wraps up today's safety tip, courtesy of the Paducah Police Department. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.
That was your safety tip of the day, brought to you by the Paducah Police Department, our very own Community Engagement Officer, Officer Blake Quinn. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So I have another question. You know, a lot of times we hear the term just leave, right? And coming from me, a domestic violence survivor, I remember questioning a lot of times while I was in that situation. And I still get emotional to this day with that because I was pregnant. And so I was in a very vulnerable position. I left home, I left my home country, which is Jamaica. Now I'm in the United States with this person. And though I had family members across the United States, I was in New Jersey, a family member, Miami, a family member is in like Tennessee. So I'm isolated. I was completely isolated. But now here I am, 7 months pregnant, wondering what my life would look like if I did leave, you know, when it comes to stability and just financially, just all of that. And so we often hear the phrase, just leave, when talking about abusive relationship. Why is this advice so oversimplified, and what do people misunderstand about the difficulty of leaving?
Oh, it is something that we think we're doing to help. We think we're encouraging somebody by saying, just leave. But what happens is a complete invalidation of what they're experiencing and the complicated nature of their lives. And you just explained your scenario so beautifully in that it's not just walking out the door. And so people will say, well, if the perpetrator doesn't have the door locked, you're not handcuffed to the floor, you're not handcuffed anywhere, they're not physically restraining you. They're undermining and completely missing the idea of psychological constraints, right? We have this, and we can compare it to everyday life of, I know that I should be doing different things in my life, and I'm not doing those things because of psychological constraints. I say, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough free, all of these things. The level of psychological constraint that happens in a cyclical abuse cycle where trauma bonding is present, where you have children present, animals present, a mortgage present, you have a whole life there. And so think about just waking up tomorrow and saying, tomorrow is the day that I'm going to give up everything that I know, risk moving my kids to a new school, risk all of these things. And your brain is telling you, I know this pattern. I know how to stay safe in this. I don't know how to I don't know how to get to Miami. I don't know what's going to happen when this baby is born in 2 months. I don't know all of those things. And so your brain says, let's stay here. We, at least people say, the devil you know, that phrase.
So it's a fear of the unknown.
It's a fear of the unknown, and that it could be worse. And again, usually our perpetrator will say things like that. You think it's bad here? Wait till you get out there. And then the threats come. I'm going to call your family and tell them all of this stuff. You know your mom loves me more than she loves you. You know that nobody's going to believe you in the community. I have this role in the community. Or I'm going to take that baby. you're going to have to co-parent with me. You're never going to get rid of me. And so then our brain just says, that is too scary. That is too much. And then you go talk to a friend and they say, just leave. And it just feels like the air's let out of the balloon, and that you don't have that support, even though that person thinks they're being the support, which is really a really sad situation for those people, and why shows like this are so important to educate people who are trying to support their loved ones.
And I want to just piggyback on that. You know, for survivors and those who are listening or watching this episode, or just any episode on Voices of Victory, you know, the just leave, you know, is having that support, as you mentioned, the support system to say, hey, I support you. I'm here if you need me. I somehow, you know, through the grace of God, created that. I knew before I left that I needed to leave. Were there some trauma bond? Absolutely. Because again, as you mentioned, the fear of the unknown and staying in what you know.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember asking myself those questions, like, who's going to take me in with a baby? It's not just me, you know, but I had my mom and she was very supportive, but there's a part of her that says, just go to my friend in New York. And I'm just looking at, okay, I go to your friend in New York. I stay there for 2 weeks, and then she's ready for me to get out, and I'm not ready to be on my own in an entire country. You know, but I understood that I needed to leave.
Yes.
But I think and that's why this book is so important. I didn't write this book as a victim. I wrote it as a survivor and as a guide to help domestic violence victims to identify those signs, as you mentioned, and those things to look for. And even before getting trapped into that is like looking for those red flags and not ignoring them and seeing the sweet side of someone in the initial stage. So thank you so much for this insightful episode, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So let's go to the stigmas, right, that exist around domestic violence. How do they contribute to the shame and isolation that survivors often experience?
Absolutely. So just what we were talking about, that idea of one stigma is that the survivor who doesn't just leave is weak or isn't strong enough to face those fears. That's not accurate, right? We know that that no one is immune to domestic violence. I would start my groups with the survivors of domestic violence, introducing myself, just like you kind of introduced me here, that I am educated, I have my doctorate degree, I am trained as a domestic violence advocate, I am a mother, I am somebody who's surrounded by people in this community, and I could absolutely be a victim of domestic violence. There's nothing about me that protects me because it's not me. Right. It's the perpetrator that makes me a victim of domestic violence. And so the words that we use matter. When we talk about prevention and awareness, I'm a stickler when I hear people saying we're doing prevention work in the community and they're working with potential victims. That's not prevention, that's awareness. Prevention is working with the people who are apt to perpetrate, who have those risk factors. And so really focusing on the support and hearing and validation of survivors and their stories, and understanding that usually what they've done so far is what's keeping them alive. And so I'm never going to know more about the safety mechanisms for a survivor than usually she does or they do. And so reducing those stigmas that they're weak, that they aren't seeing the red flags, that they're blinded by love, those things aren't accurate. Those are human natures, right, that are lending themselves to being a victim of somebody who's very harmful in our society. And so the focus should be on the one perpetrating, and the support should then come to the victim of how can we help now that you've experienced this thing that has happened to you.
Love that. Thank you so very much. It is now time for our highlighted segment called Making Empowered Choices, brought to you by Janie Wells, psychology instructor here at WKCTC.
Hi, my name is Janie Wells. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor and assistant professor of psychology at West Kentucky Community and Technical College. These tips come from the book, Why Does He Do That? By Lundy Bancroft. I also recommend Should I Stay or Should I Go? By the same author. These are some of the recognized styles of abuse and what an abuser might say. The demand man might say, it's your job to do things for me. If I'm unhappy about something in my life, it's your fault. Don't place demands on me. Be grateful for what I choose to give. I'm above criticism. The Mr. Right mentality might say, you should be amazed by my intelligence. I know better than you do, even about what's good for you. Your opinions aren't worth taking seriously. The water torturer might say something like, you're crazy. You blow up over nothing. I can convince other people you're the one who is troubled. As long as I remain calm, you can't call my behavior abusive. I know exactly how to get under your skin. The drill sergeant type might say, I need to control your every move or you'll do it wrong. I know exactly how everything should be done. I'm watching you like a hawk to keep you from becoming independent. I love you more than anyone in the world, but you disgust me. The Mr. Sensitive type might say, nothing in the world is more important than my feelings. I'm against macho men, so I can't possibly be abusive. I can get inside your head whether you want me there or not. The player type might say, women were put on this earth to have sex with me. Women who want sex are easy, and women who refuse sex are frigid. It's not my fault women find me irresistible. I'm in this relationship for when I feel like it and it's convenient for me. If you could meet my sexual needs, I wouldn't have to turn to other women. The Rambo type might say things like, strength and aggression are good. Compassion and conflict resolution are bad. I won't show fear or grief at any cost. Women are here to serve men and be protected by them. Men need to keep their women in line. The victim type might say, everyone has hurt me, especially women I've been involved with. I'm justified in doing whatever I think you do to me and making it worse. Women who complain about mistreatment by men are out for blood. My life's been so hard, I'm not responsible for my actions. The terrorist type might say, you can't defy me or leave me. Your life is in my hands. I would rather die than accept your right to independence. Children are tools that I can use to make you fearful. Seeing you terrified is exciting and satisfying. If you recognize some of these statements as being typical of what your partner might say, please reach out for help using the resources below.
That was our highlighted segment called Making Empowered Choices, brought to you by Janie Wells, psychology instructor at WKCTC. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk now about the fear of retaliation. The fear of retaliation is a significant barrier for many who want to leave. How does this fear manifest, and what are some steps that survivors can take to protect themselves?
Oh gosh, yeah, that fear of retaliation is something that perpetrators use all the time. If you're familiar with the wheel of power and control and all the coercive tactics that perpetrators use to obtain and then maintain that power and control over another person, they use every area of that. We talked a little bit about using children, using financial abuse, using their isolation. All of these things are ways that they start to obtain that power and control. And then when the victim says, I'm leaving, I'm done, we're not doing this anymore, somehow brings that up, the statistics are that risk of physical or sexual violence on the power and control wheel, it is this big, bold, black line. It is increased by about 75% at that point, because when the fear of losing that power and control comes, they will escalate. And so that is when we have the highest risk of homicide. We have bystander homicide, meaning people who are trying to help parents, police officers, children. And so victims know that. They have lived in this turmoil within the home. And so they know the unspoken and spoken threats that are promised, right? Sometimes we don't know those on the outside. So we say things like, just leave. And they say, well, no, he has a gun, he has this, or he's used these things. And so the fear of that type of thing happening is so present and so relevant. And so I encourage people through educational programs like this, through the domestic violence programs here in our town, to be educated on safety planning, that if you really just encourage somebody to leave and walk out that day, that can also be dangerous. We need planning and safety planning to make sure that that escape is safe for the victim and the children and the pets and whatever that looks like. We've also seen some new types of retaliation coming in with deep fakes that are present. Perpetrators are using AI and the internet to start to control their victims in a new way by creating images that aren't real, or real images, and threatening to send them to their bosses, to their families. And it is just really disheartening and really terrifying for our survivors and our victims. And
which drives so much more fear, as you mentioned, just trying to keep the peace.
Yes. And so, again, it just feels inescapable, or it never feels like there's a good time to leave at that point or to escape. And so they need us. They need community to help with that.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. For survivors, validation is crucial, but so often, again, you mentioned they face judgment from their support system. What impact does this have on a survivor's healing and recovery process?
If they're in active abuse, it maintains the active abuse for the perpetrator. The perpetrator is counting on some of those incompetencies in our society, or our unawareness in our society, for people just to say things like just leave or stick it out, or I'm sure it wasn't that bad. And so when the victim hears that, they think, I'm crazy, just like he said, just like they said, I really am losing it.
Or I'm overreacting.
I'm overreacting, right? And so when we have that kind of interaction, it can really impact the ability to escape if you don't feel that support, like you had mentioned, from family or friends. And then if you're out of the relationship at that point and out of the abuse and you have escaped, and people show that same kind of ignorance around the incident, it can really be disheartening. So what I encourage people to do is come from a place of curiosity and not of judgment or assumption, but to say, I can't imagine, tell me more. I'm here for you. I believe you. I don't know what I would do in that situation. Any of these statements that just say, I see you and I believe you for who you are, and I'm not going to put my lens of judgment on it, because it's irrelevant right now. And so even in just passing conversations with somebody, to make sure that you say, how was that for you? What was that like? Is there something I can do to help now? How are you? Right? Can I do anything?
Process. Yes, absolutely.
Anything.
Love that. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you took the time out to be here today. I know time has wind down, and I would love to bring you back at some point to even get deeper into the psychological safety of things. And I mean, we haven't even touched on, reactive abuse and all of that. Like, there's so much to talk about. But thank you for being here. And before you go, if you'd like to share how others can get in contact with you and your firm.
Yes, so again, it's Delve Health Consulting, so delvehealthconsulting.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is Dr. Jacobs at Delve Health Consulting, and so I'd love to talk with anyone further. On my website, there's a way to message me as well. And again, just thank you for your work that you're doing here, and I'm excited anytime I can be a part of community education, because I know there's so many people out there who are thirsty for it in our area. So thank you for your work.
Looking forward to bringing you back on the show, and thank you again for being here. Before we go on with the end of this episode, I want to take the time out to highlight the National Domestic Violence Hotline. For help, call 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. Or text the word BEGIN, BEGIN, to 88788. Remember, your voice matters, your life matters, and you deserve to be safe and loved. You are not alone, and you're fearfully and wonderfully made. I've been your host. My name is Danette Mahabeer Turner. See you on the next episode.